Today we're going to talk about how Republicans are weaponizing the hurricane response and what it means for the election moving forward. I interview Secretary Pete about Trump lying about the hurricane relief effort to help himself politically, how he and the rest of the administration resolved the port strike, and the huge jobs report from this past week. And I'm joined by State Supreme Court Justice from North Carolina, Allison Riggs, to discuss abortion rights, fair maps, and what's at stake in one of the most important swing states in the country this year. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're watching No Lie. Hurricane Helene made landfall this past week, devastating a number of states in its path. The response from the federal government has been swift, but completely dwarfed by just the sheer amount of disinformation being peddled on the right. Even for someone like me, who spends an unhealthy amount of time online, I've never encountered the deluge of disinformation and misinformation as I've seen surrounding this hurricane, which will have major implications in the near future in the upcoming election. And I'll get into that in a moment. But first, for the sake of rebutting some of the disinformation out there, I want to turn your attention to the most pervasive lie, and it's being spread by the person more responsible for lying than anyone else in America.
Death and destruction that we haven't seen maybe ever. It's a real bad one, and they have to get people there because they don't have people there. They don't have the people. Kamala wined and dined in San Francisco, and all of the people in North Carolina, no helicopters, no rescue. It's just what's happened there is very bad. They're offering them $750 to people whose homes have been washed away.
That the federal government is completely MIA, only offering people $750 and just calling it a day. First off, the $750 is the first grant given by FEMA. It's intended to just get you money immediately so that you have instant cash to buy necessities. Food, drinks, diapers, formula, toiletries, medicine. The amount is the same for everyone. It's also an increase, by the way, from the $500 of initial funds that was distributed during the Trump administration. From there, FEMA is meeting with those impacted on an individual basis to determine how much to allocate for repair costs, and that can go up to a maximum of $42,500. The Biden-Harris administration has also approved a 100% federal cost share for emergency response activities in Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. They've approved major disaster declarations for Florida, Georgia, North and South Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee. They've directed the Defense Department to deploy up to 1,000 active duty soldiers to support response efforts. In all, more than 5,300 federal personnel are on the ground supporting the response. More than $20 million in individual assistance has been provided to thousands of survivors. FEMA has shipped over 9 million meals, 11 million liters of water, 250,000 tarps, and 150 generators. All of which is to say, this notion that the government is just handing out $750 and washing their hands of the situation is a lie peddled by people who are looking to help themselves politically. But to the second point that Trump was making, that the federal government is MIA, here are Republican officials who've made it abundantly clear that that's not even close to the case.
The president just called me yesterday afternoon. I missed him and called him right back. And he just said, hey, what do you need? And I told him, we got what we need. We'll work through the federal process. He offered that if there's other things we need, just to call him directly, which I appreciate that.
We have been, Sean, I have to say, working well with FEMA. They, in fact, were moving very quickly over the last few days for us, and getting these resources has been critically important.
I'm incredibly appreciative of the rapid response and the cooperation from the federal team at FEMA. I've been on the phone over the weekends with the senior FEMA administrator. The team has been deployed. We had our declaration of emergency processed in an expedited way over the weekend and was finalized yesterday.
I too want to thank the entire team. I mean, our communities, our citizens in the communities are certainly very resilient, as the governor stated. Our private partners, volunteers, I mean, obviously our local, our state, and our government and our federal government all working together. Just a lot of hard work going on just across the state. This storm left a tremendous amount of devastation, but the response efforts by all involved have been phenomenal.
This is an incredible experience for me. So to President Biden, thank you for coming. Thank you for paying attention to our needs. I think we've had good working relationship between the federal government.
Not for nothing, but if Lindsey Graham, if Glenn Youngkin, if Brian Kemp had the opportunity to shit on the Biden administration for being MIA, don't you think they would in October of an election year? The fact that they're not maybe suggests that the White House is doing its job. But for these purveyors of disinformation, like Trump, like Elon Musk, who's been on an absolute tear spewing lies on Twitter to 200 million people prolifically, like the usual right-wing provocateurs, none of that matters because the point is making people think that the Democrats are dropping the ball. In fact, consider this. Them lying about there being no more FEMA funds because it all went to migrant housing is going to result in some people out there who need the money not even bothering to apply. Even though there are FEMA funds available, and any money through DHS that went to migrant housing is a completely different bucket, and one has zero to do with the other. So those people out there who need the money won't bother trying to get aid because the dude running to be president is so desperate to paint Kamala Harris in a bad light that he will make people think that there aren't any relief funds left because something America first. But as I mentioned before, there are broader implications for what we're seeing right now. Keep in mind, the disinformation being spread about this hurricane and the federal government's response is so pervasive, we literally had to create a new FEMA webpage just to debunk the rumors. And even still, half the country is convinced of what Trump and Republicans are saying right now. Half the country is convinced that Joe Biden's laying on a beach somewhere, that Kamala Harris is fundraising in San Francisco, and that the people in the hurricane's path were just given $750 and a pat on the head. All the while, migrants are enjoying 5-star hotel stays at the St. Regis. This is a test run for November. This is a test run for the deluge of lies that we're going to be seeing and that are going to be spread about voter fraud, about vote dumps, about ballot harvesting. And it will run rampant on Twitter, where Elon will not only do nothing to prevent it, but he himself will spread it. We simply do not have the means to take on the sheer windfall of lies that are going to happen surrounding the election, and Republicans are relying on that. So the onus is on all of us to get out ahead of this now and explain in no uncertain terms what to expect on Election Day. Like, for example, how in certain states, like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, the Republican legislatures refused to pass a rule allowing election officials to count mail-in ballots until Election Day, meaning the first votes counted will likely be Election Day ballots that will skew Republican, followed by mail-in ballots that will skew Democratic. So when the count goes from red to blue, that's not evidence of some nefarious scheme. That is simply mail-in ballots getting tabulated from the major population centers. But because Republicans in the legislature know that the national GOP is going to scream about late-night vote dumps, they purposefully kept the law that way. They purposefully kept their inefficient system as is because it plays into Trump's hands and the disinformation that their party is going to spread. Aside from Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, we also shouldn't expect election results from Arizona or Nevada on Election Day because the process to count mail ballots is laborious, thanks to rules passed by Republicans. In Georgia, Republicans just passed a rule requiring hand recounts of all 5 million ballots, meaning that if that rule stands, it's being litigated right now, but if it stands, we won't see Georgia's result by Election Day either. None of this is evidence of fraud or theft. It is simply how the process works given the rules passed by the officials in each state or these Republican legislatures. But ultimately, the main rule is not to believe what you hear on the internet from these bad faith actors. If you want to know who not to trust, just look at the people who are telling you right now that Kamala and Biden are screwing over hurricane victims. If we want to get back to a world where the truth matters again, the only way to do it is to repudiate the people spreading these lies at the ballot box by as wide a margin as possible. Next up are previews of my interviews with Pete Buttigieg and Allison Riggs. What does it say that while the administration has been swift and thorough in dealing with this hurricane, that certain Republicans have used their time not to help, but to immediately try and vilify you guys? Like, that's what they're using their political capital, their time, their resources on while people need help.
Well, look, at any problem that Americans are facing, I think you look at it and you can either be somebody who asks, how can I help with this? Or there are people who ask, how can I help use this? Or how can I use this instead of help? Right. And the really unfortunate thing is there is so much distraction that takes away from the good work that is going on. And everybody can help. So if you're concerned about this and you're not sure what to believe, first of all, don't believe some dude on the internet. Look for actual data from FEMA, from emergency responders, from local as well as federal authorities on what's going on, and importantly, on how to help. Unfortunately, even though some of this internet politicization is relatively new, people trying to use a natural disaster for their own benefit, that's not new. People always try to exploit tragedy, but the best way through that, the best way to put that in its place is to stay aligned with those who are actually making a positive difference on the ground, trusted sources, whether we're talking about trusted news sources, trusted official sources at every level of government, or trusted third-party sources like the Red Cross, who everybody knows will tell you what is needed and how to help.
Don't believe some dude on the internet should be like the theme of this election, so the theme of our time right now. Another crisis that you dealt with was the port strike just this past week. So what is the update in terms of where that stands right now?
Well, thankfully, the ports are reopening as we speak. Goods are moving, and this is so important for our economy. It's even more important because of the disaster recovery, which is a point that we made to the parties, the companies, and the unions as they were working toward a deal, and something President Biden mentioned. Through an extraordinary amount of effort, lots going on in the administration, midnight meetings, pre-dawn meetings, extraordinary shuttle diplomacy by our acting Secretary of Labor, Julie Su, talking to companies and the unions, as well as folks like me and White House officials involved. The bottom line is there is now a tentative deal that represents a much deserved and long-awaited raise in wages for these workers. These are folks who have not seen the kind of wage gains that most American workers have over the last decade. And if you just think about what it was like during COVID, obviously to do a job like theirs, you can't do that online. You can't do that from home. Many of them lost their lives. And now they want to participate in this enormous economic growth that's happened and the enormous profitability of the shipping industry. This deal gives them a chance to do that, and it brings an end to the strike and gets those goods moving again, because we count on, obviously, all of those ports to get so many things that we buy at the store and that we use in our everyday lives.
What are the implications for fare maps as far as the state Supreme Court is concerned in North Carolina right now?
Yeah, well, this is an issue that I've spent my career focusing on, too. I was a voting rights attorney before joining the bench. I spent 15 years fighting gerrymandering in all its forms, racial, partisan, violations of the Voting Rights Act. I did a lot of work combating partisan gerrymandering. I actually argued the case in the United States Supreme Court, Common Cause v. Rucha, where the Supreme Court declined to enforce the federal Constitution in protecting voters' ability to cast votes in districts that were, not predetermined from before they went to the ballot box. So I then also argued the case in the North Carolina Supreme Court, Harper v. Hall, where a previous court, a court with a justice-minded majority, said that extreme partisan gerrymandering violates North Carolina's constitutional guarantee of free elections. Free elections doesn't just mean no cover charge. It, of course, means that as well, but it means unrestricted, unhindered, unrigged. And then I knew the day after the November 22 elections that despite the fact that we'd won that landmark case, that we'd gotten fair maps for the first time in a long time in North Carolina, that decision was likely to fall by the wayside. And unfortunately, I was right. And the North Carolina Supreme Court overturned that decision. We had new maps drawn for the 24 elections, congressional and state legislative. Our congressional map right now, we are represented by 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans in Congress, and we are a very purple, very 50-50 state. We think it is likely after these elections that it'll be either 10-4 or 11-3 Republican Democrat. So there's no case pending in front of me right now, but obviously North Carolina is a state where redistricting historically has been litigated every cycle. And we know that we will have a new census in 2030. North Carolina is growing rapidly. And I am committed to making sure that we have people on the bench who are willing to enforce the Constitution without fear or favor, because unless we have a multiracial, participatory, inclusive democracy where voters are picking their representatives rather than politicians picking their voters, our democracy doesn't work.
And I believe that in a cycle where more states have adopted fair maps, where it's gone in that direction, North Carolina is one of, if not the only states that has backslid to the extent that it has. To watch the full interviews with Pete Buttigieg and Allison Riggs, click the thumbnail right here on the screen or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel. You can also click the link on the screen to listen to the audio version of this episode, and of course to see more of my content, the subscribe button's on the screen as well.